Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and good morning. We are here, the clergy team in the Rabbi Samuel Chill Sanctuary. We are taping on Wednesday, January the 22nd. And I think it's fair to say that this has been a very eventful week and a very emotional week. Sunday, of course, was the ceasefire and hostage release deal. And we saw and experienced the relief of 3 hostages who have been in hell for 570 days coming out, and then had to experience the pain of seeing Hamas militarized strut about Gaza 15 months later, and the pain of our releasing murderers back to the territories with blood on their hands. And then the next day, of course, was the inauguration and all of the complexity that goes along with that. When you zoom out, both in Israel and in America, this is a season of ideas and speeches and messages and counter messages. I'm reminded that even in America, the president signed his executive orders, dramatically changing immigration policy, and then there was a minister at a service he was at that implored him to have mercy on immigrants and their families, and he went back to the White House and said he did not like that service very much. There's a lot of ideas being circulated in public. And what I wanted to do today, we're not talking about the merits of politics. I wanted to zoom out in this season of ideas. The ceasefire is a good idea, not a good idea. The hostage release is a good idea, not a good idea. Immigration policy should be changed or shouldn't be changed. We should be a nation of immigrants. We shouldn't be a nation of immigrants now. With all these ideas that are circulating in the public space, I wanted to zoom out and ask the question, what makes a message land? And what makes a message not land? And could we do an anatomy of a message that lands? What are the factors when a message lands? And an anatomy of what is it when a message fails to land. And our Torah reading is going to give us just a crystalline, compelling example, so rich and generative, and hopefully speaks to our complex world today. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu v'fi amcha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma Baruch atah Adonai hamlamed Torah l'amor Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So, dear colleagues and dear friends watching online, our reading this week from Va'era is such a compelling case study to put under the microscope, because let's just set it up. You have a message from God that comes after Moses makes his initial foray, goes to the Pharaoh, let my people go, and the Pharaoh says, no, 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 I will not let your people go. And the Pharaoh says, not only that, but it's going to be harder. You're shirkers, I don't like shirkers, and you're going to have to make the same amount, the same tally of bricks, and you're going to have to get your own straw. So your 18-hour days just became 22-hour days. And I don't want to hear another word from you. And now the people are really moaning and really groaning and really oppressed. And it's in that context where Moses' initial forays fail pretty spectacularly, same amount of bricks, you get the straw, that God says to Moses, hey, I've got some consolation for the Hebrew slaves. And these are the famous 5 verbs of redemption. We'll take a quick look at it, but I will redeem, I will save, I will make you my people, I will bring you to the land, etc. These are very famous verbs of redemption. And spectacularly, that message does not land. The people can't hear it. They reject it. We'll take a look at that. What's so interesting about it is that
it's true in 4 different senses. First, it's true that because God spoke them. I mean, these are God's words. It's true because while plenty of times God speaks Koamar Adonai from prophets and people don't want to hear it, that's usually because it's negative news. What you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is bad, et cetera, et cetera. But here it's uplift. It's, we've been talking about uplift since October 7th. This is true uplift. Don't worry, it's going to get better. This optimistic and hopeful message spoken by God. It's true because it actually happens. What God says he's going to do, God does. It's true because God says it. It's true because it's hopeful. It's true because it happens. And finally, it's true because for generations of Jews ever since, we live out that truth at the Pesach Seder. Those 4 verbs of redemption are the 4 cups of the Seder. And the 5th one, I'll take you to the land, is Elijah's cup or Miriam's cup. We literally live it out every Seder. And yet, the message at the time was not received at the time by its intended audience. So what we're going to do is try to figure out what was the disconnect, what was the fail. Why is God's multiply true message not landing? So and it's a quick text. So if you look on page 6, these are the 4 verbs of redemption that give rise to the 4 cups of wine. Vahotzeti, I will free you. Vahitzalti, I will redeem you. Vagaalti, I'm sorry. Vahitzalti, I'll deliver you. Vagaalti, I'll redeem you. Valakachti, I'm going to take you to be my people. Those are the first 4 cups. And then veheveti etchem el haaretz asher nasati at yadi latedota la'Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. And for the 5th, I'm going to bring you into the land I swore to your ancestors. So 5 very powerful verbs where God is the speaker and God is the actor. That's what I'm going to do to redeem and deliver and save and take you to be my people and bring you to the land. And then the answer is, Vaydaber Moshe Kain el Bnei Yisrael. When Moses told all this good news to the Israelites, it says, Velo shamu el Moshe. They would not hear Moses. Mikotzer ruach umeavodah kasha. Their spirits were crushed by cruel bondage, is the translation. So, colleagues, why couldn't they hear God's hopeful message? From whence comes this disconnect?
So, this little piece of Torah was something I had never actually thought about before, that it happens that they come back and they say no, because we always interact with this verse in the context of Passover. And in the context of Passover, it's all about the redemption and the story we know will happen. So thank you for pointing out that what follows is that they can't hear it. And it made me think of something that my kids' generation says a fair amount, which is a phrase called toxic positivity. Right?
You're always so wonderful, Michelle. Don't you just love Michelle's wonderful positive energy?
That sometimes, right, their generation points out that, like, when you hear so much that's positive and it doesn't line up with your lived experience, it doesn't help.
So another way, and what I hear in that last piece of your remarks is all the positive energy is one thing, but it collides with our current reality. Right. So therefore it's not persuasive, not credible. Other takes.
This is not going to be as good as you. We have an expression in Spanish that it's better.
You speak Spanish?
Sometimes, occasionally. It's better to have something that it's bad, but you know it, rather than something that it's good, that it's unknown to you, because it's usually scary, because changes are scary. And the idea that they are slaves, but they know what they will look like. Right. They have job security. They can bring food to their houses, and this land. Yeah, I will take you to this fabulous land. What land? No.
Right. The devil you know is better than the promised land you don't know.
Well, and also it's so interesting because God acts like they know God, but for 400 years God has been absent. God has been watching and not intervening. And so it's this very interesting thing where Moses is like, hey, I met this God and this God is going to help you. And the people are like, really? That's fascinating. God, 400 years, where has that God been? And all of a sudden now what's changed? And that feels like a very fair point, because how would they have come? I mean, they have the narratives of their ancestors, but for a very long time, God has been absent.
Yeah, we have this connection between the people and Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I don't know who this God is. And the people say, I don't know who this God is. So it's sort of like this middle ground where, again, Elisa, you're right, the God has not appeared. And God even says, Ani Adonai lo nodati echem. I am Adonai, but you never knew me as that. So I'm not even part of this equation. So how are the people then, and how are Pharaoh and how are the people supposed to then listen to this message from a totally unknown source that's not necessarily
and
helpful?
at the same time, we always the sources always tell us that Moshe has some difficulty in speech. Right. So another thing to be said is how much the message is not about the message but the good speaker.
Yeah. So let me try to unpack what I've heard your wife's comments, and I'm hearing a few things that are worth really double clicking on. One is the importance of timing, because this hopeful message came across as toxic positivity when it collided with the reality that was the opposite, the antithesis of hopeful. And I want to look at, a great text from Pirkei Avot about the importance of timing. So one thing when we think about a message landing is, what's the timing? There's a time for it to land and a time for it not to land. And then the second thing that you talked about is the connectivity and the relatability of the messenger and the audience. And both of those, both Moses as a personal messenger and then also Moses as a messenger of God that they don't even know. So here's this dude coming out of left field. They don't know him. They don't know his boss. They don't know the force that he's purporting to speak on behalf of. So why should they believe him? So let's take a look at both of those. Rabbi Kush, let's first look at the issue of messenger and message. This is from Rabbi Kushner's comment. It's on page 7 of the handout. And Elisa, would you read the second column? Perhaps they would not listen to Moses because he came from Midian. This is in Rabbi Kushner's column below the fold. Or perhaps
they would not listen to Moses because he came from Midian and had not shared their labors and suffering. The gap between Moses and his people was great. They were slaves, whereas he had grown up in the palace and had lived in the freedom of Midian. It may be that only one whose spirit had not been crushed by slavery could be capable of leading the people to freedom. The generation that grew up in slavery ultimately would be unable to take advantage of their freedom, and it would perish in the wilderness. Only their children would inherit the promised land.
Right. So I want to unpack this, which is, this seems to be saying that Moses was just too far away from the people. They were slaves. He grew up in the Pharaoh's palace. They were slaves. He had been in Midian, tending the sheep. And who is this guy to me? And that for a message to land, there has to be an intimacy between the messenger and the audience. And that intimacy was wanting. When you think about that factor, what comes up for you? The connectivity between messenger and audience. I remember, by the way, Andy, just as you're thinking, I remember Andy Stanley talking about, before he gives a sermon, he always wants to sit in the pews with his church. I mean, and he has, Yom Kippur size quantity every Sunday, several seatings where his church is just jam-packed. And during the music part of the service, he is in the pews with people, kind of like we do our procession, because if there's too much of a distance between the preacher and the congregation, that doesn't go as well as if the preacher comes from out of the congregation. I remember him saying that. And so you had that connectivity challenge here. What comes up for you when you read that comment of Rabbi Kushner's?
We just celebrated MLK, and to think about when Reverend King was speaking to his audience, he was one of them, and so his message really landed. Now, even though he was he was well educated, but he was one of the people. So I think that that's really kind of important, because if he was a leader that was not really in the moment with the people, it would not have landed as well. I mean, when his the marches that they had, he was front and center in the midst of those thousands of people marching.
But this comment to me speaks to the importance of both being part of the people and not part of the people, right? That's key, is that there's a believability, a connectivity that you need in order for your message to be heard. But you also need to have the perspective that enables you to see where you need to go. And because Moses was not of the people, because he did not grow up enslaved, he had the ability to transcend their reality, their lived experience, and to see another possibility.
Elisa, that's so important, that nuance of the people and not of the people. And I'm wondering, when you think about our new president, who's won the 7 swing states, and his election victory was fueled by his appeal to working class families. I see you, I get you, you're struggling, I get that. And he's not a working class family. He's he's wealthy by his own account. So how do you think about this dynamic in terms of a person who's not, President Biden was from Scranton. I'm Scranton Joe. That's never been part of President Trump's appeal. I'm not Scranton Joe. I'm rich, and but I see you who are not yet rich. How do you see that dynamic playing out? This I'm of the people, not of the people.
It feels like he represents what some perceive as a promised land of being able to be very affluent and do whatever you want and say whatever you want and get whatever you want, and that he represents that to people. He is different in that way, and people want that. They want that for themselves.
I'm not as interested in the political piece of this as I am in the personal piece, the sense of like you can sort of only dream of the things that you believe might be possible, unless you're somebody, absolutely extraordinary who just, once in a generation who sees beyond. Right. For most of us, we come to accept the things that we believe are possible. Right. And I think the kotzer ruach here, the shortness of spirit or the crushed spirit that our ancestors have, actually comes from generations. You hear people who come out of the former Soviet Union and they'll say things like, we couldn't imagine talking like that, or we couldn't imagine, if I'm a Jewish person, that I could have even aspired to take a position like that. It was just very clear that that was not going to be within the realm of what I could have. And I wonder whether part of the kotzer ruach that the Israelites are carrying, along with their avodah kasha, their heavy labor, is like, this is my place in the world. What are you trying to tell me something different?
And how do you see Moses's identity as somebody who didn't share their slavery, wasn't recently a slave, was never a slave, came from Midian after a stint growing up in the Pharaoh's palace? How do you see them? How do you see those facts as affecting his ability to connect with them?
Yeah, I think, look, he's an intermediate personality, right? Because he's not all the way out here and he's not all the way there. I agree with Elisa. Like, it is only when he discovers in himself his family story, when he ran his 23andMe and was able to understand himself as part of this people, that he's able to come in and galvanize the people. And yeah, I think something that you're grappling towards is that's actually important, because he grew up thinking whatever he wanted would come to him. So he has that orientation towards the world.
Right. Yes. I think that
by the way, just before it's the way that Israelis who lost children in the war, or parents whose kids didn't come back from Gaza, were killed, like Hirsch Poland's parents, they have a credibility that can't be gainsaid. In other words, if your kids died in the war, or Hirsch Poland's parents, whose kid was, Hirsch was executed on that horrible day in Gaza, the very fact that they're deeply there grants their words a power. And that was what was missing, that personal identification with the audience and that personal credibility was missing with Moses. Elias.
Yeah, I don't think that I necessarily agree that the person who is bringing the message or trying to convince people has to be one of them. Countless occasions in the world, in all kind of different things, going from politics, from presidents, going to team sports where a new coach comes and all of a sudden they start winning, and not necessarily he's a former player. So there are countless of situations where not necessarily, they align because they have the same experience. It's more, to me, it's about the power of the messenger and the power of the message. And a little bit like you said, if it's utopic, like, yes, I'll promise you a beautiful land and I will take you out of here. What is that,
Right. Okay, so let's talk about timing. That the timing was wrong here. The reality just didn't support it. So if on page 8, there's a famous teaching from Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar taught, do not pacify your colleague when his anger is raging. Do not comfort him when his dad lies before him. Do not challenge him at the time he makes his vow, and do not intrude upon him at the time of his disgrace. Timing as the art of life. The art of life is timing. What comes up for you when you encounter this famous teaching from Pirkei Avot?
It's so real and so hard, right? Because following this Torah, Moses would never have been able to bring a message of liberation to the Israelites in Egypt because they were crushed in spirit. They were oppressed. They were constantly suffering and just beaten down. And that's not a space where they could ever receive that message. And so it feels like this is really true. And sometimes we, as messengers, have to figure out a way to reach people even when they're not in a space to hear. And that's the most important time to be able to talk to them.
Right. And the majority of times, when you see somebody who is raging, you say, calm down,
Right. But that's precisely the point. When somebody is raging and you say, calm down, that just pisses them off. They can't hear it. So, I mean, this is the text that came to mind, Michelle, with your comment, that given the reality that they have to make the same amount of bricks and they have to get their own straw, the timing is off for this message. Don't worry, I'm going to take you to the land of Israel.
I think, Elisa, I think you introduced me to, is it Dr. Becky? The children's therapist who talks about, do you remember the name? No, sorry. Well, there is a famous child psychologist on social media who, and sorry if I got the name incorrectly, who advises parents kind of exactly this wisdom, right? When your kid is throwing a temper tantrum, that's not the time to say, calm down, right? That's the time to make sure that they're in a safe space, shut the door, and then wait until they're able to hear what you have to say. And I think, certainly not comforting someone while their dead lie before them is ancient, precious Jewish wisdom that we do try to abide. The question about whether this is the time or not, I know I started off here today by saying, well, maybe it's not the right time, but I think, Elisa, I agree with you. Like there never would have been a right time. It's not like if you shut the door and you have that, the ancient version of that child psychologist's wisdom, and you just say, okay, you're going to calm down eventually and we can talk, that there would be a time.
Right.
Sometimes, and this may be the very time that God comes in and says, all right, Moses, we've got to shake these people regardless of whether they can hear or not. And in fact, that's what happens in the very next verse, which is that, we come in and Moses says, but they didn't listen to me, right? And God sends him back into the ring, right? God says, we're not going to give up on this mission. If it's not the right time now,
right,
we're going to make the right time.
But what happens next is that the facts on the ground have to change, so that there's a plausibility narrative and a plausibility structure through the 10 plagues. In other words, mere words don't change the landscape. Words plus the 10 plagues, climaxing with your son's going to die, every firstborn son is going to die. When you change the narrative and you change the landscape, now a different message can be heard differently because you've changed the landscape. So I want to ask a counter narrative question, which is, we see that mere words don't work. Even 5 verbs of redemption that we love and we drink to it every Seder don't work. And that what worked was not 5 words of redemption. What worked was 10 plagues that just changed the reality on the ground. If you were Moses's coach, if Moses had come to you for advice and counsel, you know, I'm going to be talking to these slaves. I just screwed this thing up. I just stepped in it. I was supposed to make it better. I made it worse. I made it harder. And now I got to talk to him. What do I say? Or what do I do that will be helpful? How would you have advised Moses in this moment? Before the 10 plagues, before God's miraculous display of his row on a tuyah, of an outstretched arm, before God's miracles intervene, just at the human level, what would you have advised Moses?
I would have said you're going to get up really early. You're going to go out to their work site. You're going to gather up all the straw and all the materials. And when they get to the work site, you're going to be there and you're going to work with them all day. And at the end of a long day of really working and being with them and just hearing their stories and being present, you say, like, you know, this doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right to me that you're living this every single day. Can we figure out a plan to get out of this? Can we figure out a plan to change this story?
So in other words, what you would say to Moses if you were his coach is it's not about a speech and it's not about words. Even magical words spoken by God don't work. It's about being there with them.
What I love about this moment is actually not from that perspective, but from, it's not the right, it feels like not the right question, because Moses is actually coming back to the coach and saying, you didn't give me what I need to succeed. I actually am not set up for success here. And it's not that Moses is able to go back and use and gain more credibility or do more things with the people. It actually takes an act of God. Like it takes more. Moses is, and sometimes maybe we need to, maybe it is an act of great, not just humility, but also courage to say that I don't have the tools I need for success.
In other words, maybe you advise Moses, hey, Moses, you have this relationship with God. Could you find a way to say to God, God, 5 words of redemption are not going to do the trick. We need 10 plagues that are going to change the reality on the ground. Can we have 10 plagues, not 5 words?
To me, it's not about the change, coaching him and changing the message. It's about action. You know, it's about the plagues. It's, you know, it looks like Moses wasn't that successful when he tried to deliver speeches. And he came down years later down the mountains with the tablets, and, you know, it was a disaster down there. He had to crush the tablets. So the action is pretty much the only thing that people listen.
Yes, speeches are tough. So I wanna just pivot now. So what we've established is there was a problem of the messenger and lack of connectivity. There was a problem with the messenger's boss, which is God, and lack of connectivity. There was a problem of timing. After all this spectacular fail, how could any speech work? I want to zoom out for a second before I ask you our BAFO wrap-up question. And the BAFO wrap-up question is, what is the message that our congregation needs to hear from us now? I mean, Moses's words did not land. We've all, you know, unpacked that fact. Action was what was required. And my question to you in the week of the hostage and ceasefire deal, and in the week of the inauguration, and in the week of the headlines that all of our community is reading every day with all the complexity, what message / what action does our congregation need from us? What words and deeds of ours will land, and what words and deeds of ours will not land? And I wanted to just introduce this with a, so we're all reading from the same page, a teaching that I heard from Gary Oren, who taught persuasion at the Kennedy School for years, and he taught this to the board 20 years ago, and it's a word that I think I only ever heard from Gary. I never used this word in real life, but he calls it the salience principle, S-A-L-I-E-N-C-E, the salience principle. Salient is prominent, and the way Gary used it was that if you're trying to persuade your audience, the question you want to be asking is, what is salient to the audience? What is the audience's message? What does the audience need to hear? What are the audience's needs? How do you scratch the audience's itch? What is salient to the audience? And if you can't do that, you can't persuade the audience. And Gary's example, I remember this from 20 years ago, was he was hired by a nonprofit to help them shape a message that would persuade teens not to smoke. And before Gary and his persuasion skills came on board, the message had been to a 15-year-old, hey, don't start smoking, because if you start smoking, then the last 30 of your life you might not have. You might not have your 70s, 80s, and 90s, and there's so much good living that can happen in your 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if you start smoking at 15, then you're not going to enjoy your 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that message failed to land because 15-year-olds are immortal in their own mind, and 15-year-olds are going to live forever. And so Gary's question to his colleagues was, what is salient to 15-year-olds? And the answer is they want to have sex, and they want to have boyfriends and girlfriends, and they want to have romance. And so they changed the message to don't smoke because it will interfere with your 70s, 80s, and 90s, to don't smoke because it will interfere with your current romance. If you want to have romantic game, if you want to have romantic success now as a teenager, don't smoke because it will brown your teeth, it will make you tired, it will make you coughing, it will make you less attractive. And that appeal, what was salient was romance now, not the last 30 of your life, decades from now. That did the trick. So with that in mind, the salience principle, what is salient to our congregation, and what are our words and deeds that would respond helpfully to what our congregation's needs are in this complicated moment?
Well, I have two examples. So last night we were blessed to have a beautiful gathering of new members, and many of them, they said that one of the reasons that they joined Temple Emmanuel was that after October 7, they feel that they needed community, and they needed a community that would support Israel. And so definitely people need to hear about Israel. People want to hear that we are in the same page in a way. But also, you were saying before about the speeches, that speeches are hard. Guess what? I have a surprise for you. You did a sermon in High Holidays about going to Israel and how many people went to Israel after your powerful speech. So speeches land. And that's what our congregation needs to hear.
That's so interesting because I feel like speeches land when you manage to speak to where people's hearts are with a message that they're open to. Because you can give the best sermon in the world, but if it's not what people are ready to hear, then it won't be received. And I think the power of that sermon was that everyone was there. Everyone was so torn apart by October 7th, and that was a tangible, actionable response that filled the world with more positivity and with more connectivity. And I think that's our mission, particularly now, is to say that the world is nutty and the political climate wherever you go feels so volatile and so broken and so filled with retribution. But that's not here. Here is a space where we love each other, where you're seen for who you are, where we support one another, where we build an alternative story, where this is a place of love and connection and community, and we do the work that makes that possible.
So love all of that, and my instinct would be towards, like, we're here, we're together, connecting. And I'm also mindful that while these 5 words don't work in their immediate context, they ring out for eternity. I mean, every Passover Seder, this is the core of what we say and who we are, and it has shaped generations of Jews as we have encountered hard times throughout our history. And so to me, I think the message might land or not land is that we keep reaching towards God together.
Mm.
And I would add that, you know, I agree with everything everyone has said. I think that the message that we want to promote is that despite how complex things are now, that there is a hope for the future, but that hope for the future lies in what actions we can do now, and again, as community, in a loving community, as Elisa said, and that we can be in this cold weather, we can be a radiator, producing the heat needed for moving, taking the world as it is, and being able to work towards making it better. And that works here. And when we not only talk the talk but walk the walk as a congregation, go to Israel, join community, all of that, I think that's going to be the message that people want to hear.
Mm. Well, colleagues, thank you. Since you know I'm allergic and constitutionally unable to have a neat class neatly wrapped with a bow and a tie and a ribbon, I want to just leave us. I feel rattled. I feel deeply unanchored and deeply uncertain. And so I want to leave with not tidy ends and tidy answers, but I want to respond to what you said with questions. So one of the messages is we do community here and we get strength from here. So here's my question. I don't have the answer. I just want to leave you with the question. I gravitate 110% every fiber of my being to that answer. We do community here. And yet, or as Michelle would say, I also wonder whether that's enough for this moment. If you spend your day, you get here at 7 a.m. and daven, and you close your day out at 7:30, you get here at 7:30 and daven. And not only daven, you meet and greet and you connect with our people. And in between, you are all about 385 Ward Street in Newton, Mass. Is that enough? Is that enough or not? And that for me has been a $64,000 question, and I'm always tormented by it because all of my energy is here, and I wonder whether that is enough. Michelle, you raised the point, it's such a superb point, that these words were not true in their moment, but they were true for eternity. True. And I'm left rattled by what does that mean? What does that mean when words don't land, but they're true for eternity? We tend to think about the prophets that they were failures, even though we read their words as haftarot, but they were spectacular failures at the time. And I'm wondering how much comfort and consolation I can get if words don't land at the intended time that they are received by the intended audience that receives them and fails to, it doesn't click. And the fact that it's going to be a haftarah 100 years from now when we're dead, I'm not sure how much consolation that gives me. And here's the third thing that I want to leave you just rattled with this question. I was so taken by the moral courage of the pastor who says, have mercy on the immigrants and their families. By the way, this is a whole separate conversation. I don't know what the right moral response is on immigration policy. So I'm not at all opining on the merits about what immigration policy should be and whether the changes are wise or not wise or ethical or not ethical. I think it's super complicated. The more you study it, the more you read about it, super complicated. Put that to the side. I'm just saying this pastor, with the president and all this new leadership there, said, have mercy on your family. And that was real courage. The courage to offer up a message that was going to spectacularly fail and not land. And with today's technologies, by the time the new president got to the White House, he let the world know it was a bad service and it didn't land. And yet offered with moral courage. And that's my, here's a question for me, which is, what's the role of moral courage in our teaching, preaching, and singing? What's the role of moral courage in what we do on this very bima of the Rabbi Simon Chill Sanctuary? I'm mindful of Rabbi Chill, for whom the sanctuary is named. Man, he was a baller. He was a baller. He told people during the Vietnam War, Vietnam is immoral, and that was not a message they wanted to hear. He told people in a racist Jewish community that civil rights was a moral responsibility. They didn't want to hear that. He told this community with Sabra and Shatila that what Ariel Sharon and the Israeli government did was immoral and un-Jewish and unethical. And when Haskell Shapiro told him, Rabbi, do you have a different sermon for the second service on Rosh Hashanah? And he said, why, Haskell? And he said, Rabbi, they didn't like that sermon. And he said to Haskell, that's why they need to hear that sermon. That kind of moral courage that Rabbi Chill had, and that kind of moral courage that this pastor had this week, I wonder whether I have it, and I wonder whether we need it. Shabbat Shalom.